poisoned pawn. Prodigy versus Magnus. This is the best story in chess history. Magnus got another unanimous email with title, The Prodigy, same place, same time. He couldn't wait to be there. Tomorrow he was there. The Hall of Champions was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Magnus stood at the center of the room, the chessboard before him gleaming under the soft light. The pieces were set, the clock ready. But this time his opponent was not Bobby Fischer. Fischer stood to the side, his arms crossed, his sharp eyes watching intently. Beside him was a child, no older than 10, with an air of quiet confidence. His name was Nova.
Magnus?
Fischer said, his voice calm but commanding.
This is Nova, my student.
Magnus studied Nova carefully. The child was small, unassuming, but there was something in his eyes, a spark of brilliance, a hunger for the game. Magnus extended his hand.
Nice to meet you, Nova.
Nova shook his hand firmly, their grip surprisingly strong.
Nice to meet you too, sir.
Fischer gestured to the board.
Nova has been learning from me for some time now. I thought it was time for a real test. Are you ready?
Magnus nodded, though a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. He had faced legends, but this was different. Nova was a child, yet Fischer's confidence in them was unmistakable. He took his seat, the white pieces in front of him. Nova sat across the table, their expression calm and focused. The game began. E4, C5, and the familiar struggle for the center unfolded. Knight F3, D6, D4, C takes D4, Knight takes D4, Knight F6, Knight C3, A6. A variation on the Sicilian with seemingly endless possibilities. With Bishop G5, Magnus sought to unsettle his opponent, but Nova calmly replied with E6. Pushing forward with F4, Magnus aimed to dominate the center, yet Nova's sharp mind was already at work. After Queen B6, the tension ratcheted up. Queen D2 was met by a daring Queen takes B2, a textbook entry into the poison pawn variation. White's Knight B3 forced the Black Queen to retreat to A3, and with Bishop takes F6, Magnus hoped to fracture Nova's defenses. However, after G takes F6, the darkening pawn structure hinted at looming vulnerabilities. Magnus continued his development with Bishop E2, while Nova countered with Knight C6. Following the natural course of the game, Magnus castled, and after Bishop H5 and Rook F3, Nova calmly prepared to consolidate with castle. With King H1 and F5, the stage was set for a fierce battle on both flanks. Magnus struck with Rook G3, launching an attack on the Black King. Yet Nova calmly regrouped with Knight E7. As the pressure mounted, Magnus advanced his knight with D4, hoping to intensify the assault, but Nova's precise King H8 deftly extricated his king from a deadly pin. In a moment of overzealous ambition, Magnus rapidly played Rook B1, eyeing the vulnerable B7 pawn and the queen now exposed along the B3 square. This move, however, proved premature. Nova countered with Queen C5, and the tactical equilibrium began to shift. After the exchange, Rook takes B7, Rook A D8. Magnus attempted to steady the position with Knight B3, but Nova's reply, Queen C8, maintained the pressure. Desperation led Magnus to try a new idea, Knight A5, aiming to unsettle Nova's coordination. Yet, after Queen C5, his follow-up Knight A4 turned out to be a critical misstep. Nova seized the opportunity with Bishop takes A4, further dismantling Magnus's defenses. In a final bid to claw back into the game, Magnus played Rook takes E7, but Nova's incisive D5 shattered any remaining hope. Magnus, overlooking the devastating potential of D5, hurriedly tried Rook B7. Nova calmly replied with D takes E4, and with his position collapsing under relentless pressure, Magnus had no choice but to resign. The room fell silent. Magnus stared at the board, his mind reeling. He had lost, to a 10-year-old, to Fischer's Prodigy. Nova stood, their expression calm but proud. Fischer stepped forward, placing a hand on their shoulder.
Well done,
He said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Magnus extended his hand to Nova.
That was incredible. You're amazing.
Nova shook his hand, a small smile playing on their lips.
Thank you, sir. It was an honor to play you.
Fischer looked at Magnus, his gaze piercing.
Nova has been training for this moment, but this is just the beginning. Are you ready to face them again?
Magnus nodded, his determination hardening.
I'll be ready.
As he left the Hall of Champions, Magnus felt a fire ignite within him. He had been humbled, but not defeated. Nova was a prodigy, a reflection of Fischer's genius. But Magnus was the world champion, and he would not rest until he had solved the puzzle that was Nova. The game wasn't over, not even close.